west side of Chicago, and a lot of people that got busted. A couple of people had been shot, you know, and it just mounted up from there. And what we didn't know for 2 or 3 years afterwards was that leading up to the raid, the FBI, the Racial Matters Squad operating on COINTELPRO,
FBI's counterintelligence program targeted the Black Panthers.
Yes, it did, and it was about disruption and what they called neutralization.
Yes,
what a nice open word.
Mm-hmm.
And
that could mean murder, imprisonment, exile, incarceration, whatever.
Yes, or just, you know, public ridicule or public opprobrium. You know, anything,
defaming and
anything they could do.
Right.
And they also famously tried to start a gang war between the Panthers and the Blackstone Rangers, what was then the Blackstone Rangers.
Right, and wasn't Fred Hampton instrumental in...
They were, in fact, dealing with, you know, negotiating with each other. I wasn't ever going anyplace, as it turned out. But the FBI made a fake letter and wrote to Jeff Fort, who was the head of the Rangers, and said, you know, the Panthers are after you. You better do something, you know.
Fomenting gang warfare.
Absolutely.
Basically.
And there was some confrontations that were, you know, fortunately nothing terrible happened out of them.
Right.
But it wasn't because the FBI didn't try. And they were successful finally mainly through undercover agent that they had sent to infiltrate the Panthers, William O'Neill.
Right.
In setting up this raid by the cops.
And let's talk about this. December 4th, 4 a.m. in the morning.
Yes.
Right? Led by Gloves Davis.
Well, yes.
7 police officers, were there?
There were 14. 7 went into the apartment. That death squad was the 7 guys.
Okay.
Who went in, broke in. I mean, they, you know, knocked on the door and then busted in, and came in shooting. And they had a floor plan which the agent had given them,
and it's laid out in the book.
And which is a reproduction is in the book, along with some wonderful pictures of Fred.
Right.
And they went right to these couple of strategic spots in the apartment, one in particular, and this guy Gloves Davis, a black cop, with a carbine, just went down the hall and fired, you know, umpteen shots through the wall right at the place at the head of the bed where the diagram, the floor plan showed the bed was. Where Fred
But he first shot Mark Clark, right?
He shot Mark Clark as he came in the door.
Right.
Mark was waiting behind it, or was.
And Mark was, I think, 20 years old at the time.
I think that's right. Yeah, 20. No
older than that.
No, no. And they shot Brenda Harris, who was also in the front room, and then the second guy, who had a Thompson submachine gun, Officer Joe Gorman, first came in and shot through the walls from the front to the back of the apartment, and then came around to there was 2 bedrooms,
right?
And Fred was in the back one. There were 3 people in the middle one. And he came around and shot through the doorway in the middle of the room and wounded all 3 of the people in there with the .45 caliber, you know. And Doc Satchel, who was the Minister of Health, was shot all in his gut and had terrible time in all his life.
Wow.
From the effects of the shooting.
Right.
And I mean, the shooting was really lethal.
Yes.
You know? But in fact, Fred never woke up. He was drugged. And it was later proven,
by William
apparently
O'Neill.
By O'Neill, who was in the apartment the
and
evening
agent
before.
Provocateur, because everybody thought he was a bona fide member of the party.
Crazy stuff, you know. He was always talking about, let's do this, let's do that, criminal type stuff, get into trouble. But Deborah Johnson, Akua,
Right.
that you know, and Jerry.
She's a wonderful woman, still doing it too.
She was
in
that
Chicago.
was Fred's fiancée. She was 8 months pregnant with Fred Jr.
Yes.
She was pulled out of the back bedroom, and then 2 cops went back in there, and she said she testified. She heard one voice say, "He'll barely make it." He had been shot in the shoulder. He was perfectly all right, except that he was drugged and couldn't wake up. But he had a fairly superficial wound in his shoulder, and then there were 2 shots, and then the other voice said, "He's good and dead now."
Right.
And that was what killed him. He had 2 shots right through his head.
Right. Point blank.
At point blank range. Point blank range.
Excuse me, but I have to open our live line.
Go ahead.
If you want to ask a question of Dennis Cunningham, our guest, please call 415-621-4473. That's 621-4473. Let's talk about the immediate aftermath and the denials by Hanrahan before we run out of time.
Hanrahan was the prosecutor, that's what they call a state's attorney. He was a big shot in the Democratic Party and thought by many to be the heir apparent to Mayor Daley, the old Mayor Daley.
Right.
And he had just got in office running on what he called a war on gangs. And so he designated the Panthers as a gang. And he had a lot of cops assigned to him in a job. Usually had old cops ready for retirement, and they would go out and serve subpoenas. But he had some badass cops who, like gloves, who were used to, kicking butt in the streets, and they were assigned to him, and they were doing a lot of stuff, and so they were the raiders in this thing, and he was in charge of them. And he came on television that morning and said that, that they had gone to serve a search warrant and were met with gunfire, and that the Panthers had engaged in a shootout.
I actually remember that.
Refused to the ceasefire.
Yeah.
And and the papers believed him, even though there were reporters there the first day that could see from the bullet holes in the walls that all the shooting went in one direction.
Yes.
All the shooting went towards the Panthers.
Absolutely.
And none came back against them, really, but the exception of one shot, which was a wild shot fouled by Mark when he was killed. So the thing came unraveled over a period of a week or 2. They put a picture on the front page of the Chicago Tribune saying, "Here's the bullet holes in the wall around the back door where Fred was firing from the bedroom door at the cops who were coming in the back door."
Oh my goodness.
And we went over there, and these holes, they were nails that were driven in the frame of the door to hold